There we go. Perfect. Okay, so would like to thank everybody for joining us here for our broadcast today. I'm Jay Matteson, your host and Jefferson County Agricultural Coordinator with Jefferson County Economic Development, and very excited to bring you this conversation with Michelle today. Michelle Miller, an international agriculture advocate. Would like to thank the folks that make this webinar series possible, and that's the great folks at Midway International Logistics right here in Watertown over on Bradley Street, a great company, and we really appreciate their support. If you want the world's best naturally aged cheddar cheese, Great Lakes Cheese Company down in Adams, a great company that we have here in the county. They take a lot of our local milk and make some fantastic cheese. We're also very proud to be home to the North American headquarters of Afgratech. They're the manufacturers of AminoMax feed supplements right here in Watertown. The Development Authority of the North Country, a great development organization, state agency here that's based in Jefferson County. They do fantastic work across our 3-county region, and we appreciate their support. National Grid Economic Development and their energy efficiency programs. We work very closely with both of those programs. Number one, to help roll out economic development efforts. They're a great partner. And also to help businesses such as our farms, our manufacturers, and so on, access their energy efficiency programs. They've been a great partner, and that's National Grid. The American Dairy Association Northeast, the great folks at American Dairy Association do a lot of work to help consumers recognize the value of dairy products in their diet, to help make those dairy products more visible out in the community. And I'll give a plug for this. On January 6th, American Dairy Association Northeast is one of our close partners in rolling out another food distribution program for folks in need. We'll be serving probably around 500 cars. The program will start at 1 p.m. on January 6th over at Jefferson Community College. So really appreciate the support of American Dairy Association Northeast. We also have Lundy Group of Companies. You might recognize that name. Lundy Group of Companies is developing our Thousand Islands International Agribusiness Park just outside of Watertown. We really appreciate their work that they're doing to grow agriculture here in Northern New York. Converse Laboratories, a lot of our homes, our businesses work with Converse Laboratories to do water testing and other environmental testing. We really appreciate the great support of Converse Laboratories. And then the voice of agriculture here at the grassroots level, and that's Jefferson County Farm Bureau. If you're not a Farm Bureau member, you should be. They are our grassroots voice in Albany and in Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you, they are so critical in this day and age in making sure agriculture gets the representation it needs with our elected officials. I want to point out again that today's webinar, you can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You just click on that Q&A button and you'll be able to type in your question. When you hit submit, that pops up on my screen, and I will do the best I can to incorporate those questions into the interview with Michelle today. We have a lot of questions, but your questions are the most important. So please get those to me, and I'll be happy to incorporate those into the conversation. If you want to go back and look at some part of today's webinar, it is being recorded. Yep, I've got the recording button on. That's always important. It is being recorded, and it will be available probably within about 24 hours at www.agricultureevents.com. That's agricultureevents.com. So please don't hesitate to check that recording out. Well, after all of that, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend Michelle Miller, the Farm Babe. And Michelle, we are so excited to finally have you join us today. Let's see, we had you scheduled, let's see, I think it was last March. And about a week out from our agricultural development conference, I had to call Michelle up and say, hey, Michelle, we're canceling the event because of the outbreak of COVID. And from what I understand, Michelle, you've had a lot of that happen to you here. I can't even imagine what your schedule has been like with all of this. So, but Michelle has been very patient and very helpful and was willing to do the webinar today. Michelle grew up in 4-H and enjoyed going to a friend's family farm up in Wisconsin. And, you know, you might argue with me about who has the best cheddar cheese, Michelle, but I'm just telling you, until you've tried ours, there's no argument. So just say it, just say it.
Cheese heads though, Jay. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but you know, those folks just haven't had our cheddar cheese yet. So, but anyways, Michelle went to a friend's family farm, rode horses, did chores, got her hands dirty, and everything in agriculture. But that didn't drag you into the industry. You decided you wanted to pursue the fashion industry. Went out west. Worked for, and I'm not a fashion person, so forgive me if I brutalize these names. Gucci.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell I don't even buy that stuff. Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, and then lived in Chicago for a few years. But then you ended up on a farm in Iowa. We're going to hear more about that. But the other interesting thing about Michelle is her goal was to travel to all 7 continents by the time she was 30 years old. And she accomplished that task. I mean, I've only been to 1, North America. I haven't been off of North America yet, so I still will someday. And you've been to 67 countries. So that's pretty phenomenal. That's by the time you're 30, what? You just turned 30, right, Michelle?
No, I'm like 38 now. So.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you know, yeah. I was trying.
But I still love to travel. Agriculture, international travel are definitely my 2 biggest passions. So now I try to combine the 2 and like learn about agriculture all over the world and, you know, global food security. It's interesting. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to enjoy hearing about that. So Michelle was in Iowa on a cattle farm, but just recently you moved to Florida and you're beginning what I call a starter farm down there in Florida. So we're excited to hear about that. And there's a lot of information that Michelle is going to share with us. And so I am going to start asking questions. Now, Michelle, I left out some of the details of just what took you from Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills to being an international agriculture advocate? How did that happen? How did you go from Gucci to agriculture?
From rodeo to the rodeo?
Yeah, exactly. Which is what I called it the first time when we did the radio show interview.
Yeah, for sure. I know, it's so interesting, right? They say something like 80% of people don't use their college degrees. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, it's, you know, it's just interesting, like living in the big city. I lived in Los Angeles for college and lived in Chicago for most of my 20s. And, you know, throughout that time, people in the cities are generally, myself included, pretty far removed from where their food comes from agriculture. And so I had seen a lot of these films like Food Inc. and a lot of information like that, which I now know is not truthful. But at the time I was like, oh, this is a documentary, this, you know, and it just led me down the wrong path. It led me down a path of misinformation. So I had become this like anti-GMO activist. Like I was really worried and scared about, you know, factory farming and a lot of these things that I was against. But then I met and started dating a farmer, and I moved to Iowa for him in 2014. So, you know, here was this guy I had started dating, and he was growing like Monsanto GMOs and had feed.
Oh my God.
I know, right? Using hormones and antibiotics. And see, these were a lot of things that as a city girl, I thought were terrible. But the more you started learning from him and the farmers and the community, the more I realized like, wow, like I'm really misinformed. And so that's how I started my whole platform of the Farm Babe. I started about 6 years ago, and it was really just kind of a way to debunk a lot of the myths that I believed and offer a trusted science-based voice in agriculture where people could come and just learn more about the food and where it comes from and how it's produced.
Well, you make that sound simple, and when I hear that you have 200,000 followers through social media, I'm like, holy cow, that's crazy. I mean, so you started doing this in 2014. I mean, I've been 20 years as agricultural coordinator, and I lose more followers than I gain every year.
Well, we can talk about how to build a following and do all that stuff. Yeah, I started 6 years ago, so.
Jeez, that's, I mean, congratulations. I mean, that is fantastic to get that message out the way you are is fantastic. Now, one of the things that I've had to answer as we've been working together to try and put on a conference or a webinar is your moniker or your tag name on social media, the Farm Babe.
Yeah.
I just have to say, when ladies start looking at me, I say, that is what she uses so that I don't get in trouble. Why the Farm Babe? How did that happen?
Yeah, great question. And it's one that I get asked
Yeah.
a while for sure. So yeah, the Farm Babe, my blogger name, I guess, when I first started off was actually a spinoff of this food blogger called the Food Babe. And she was spreading like a ton of misinformation about food and farming online. And she had like 1 million followers at the time or something. And she put out this article that was talking about how GMOs were just drenched in toxic chemicals. And she was putting all this stuff out there that wasn't true. And I left a comment on her Facebook page and I was like, you know, we grow GMOs on our farm. I'd really love to talk to you about what we do. Like, I promise we're not drenching our fields in chemicals. Like, your food's very safe. And, you know, I'd love to have a chat with you to talk a little bit more about what we do on the farm. And it was really nice. You know, it was just this long, well thought out comment. And instead of engaging with me, she blocked me like within 5 seconds of posting. And so I had actually discovered this Facebook group called Banned by the Food Babe, which has over 10,000 members in it.
I've never heard of that group before.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like, so she's literally blocked like tens of thousands of people, including, you know, farmers, veterinarians, scientists, like really credible people that know a lot about food and farming. And so when I was banned by the Food Babe, I was just like, well, I'm just going to start the Farm Babe. Like, it was kind of just like a spinoff of that. And, you know, at the time, it's like, I didn't really think much of it. I was like, oh, like, I'm the Farm Babe. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll get like 1,000 followers. Like, I was just kind of doing it as a hobby to talk about what we were doing on the farm. But now it's turned into like a full-time career where I'm able to talk about agriculture in all different ways, not just what I was doing on the farm in Iowa, but, you know, what are they doing on the lettuce farms in California? What are they doing on the coffee farms of Costa Rica? It's really just become a great platform to bridge the gap and help give agriculture and science a bigger voice.
That is interesting. I had not, we never covered that when we did the radio interview way back when. That is an so she banned you or blocked you. Wouldn't answer your question at all.
No, and actually, if you go on like Twitter, a bunch of farmers were trying to reach out to her because it really upset the agriculture industry. And there's a hashtag on Twitter, if you check it out, it's called #VisitAFarmFoodBabe, where all farmers and ag groups were like, come on out, like, we'll show you, we'll teach you, we'll even pay you, come on out. And she just refuses, you know, just blocks and bans anybody that you know, challenges her. And it's like, you know, she lives in a big city. She has a computer science degree and whatever. And, you know, that's fine. Degrees don't always, you know, make or break knowledge, but it's just like, you can't ignore the experts. Like, you have to go to the source, you know? So it's just frustrating when the farmers, the people that are producing your food are the ones that aren't allowed to talk about food production. Like, what the heck? Because we're debunking everything. We're interfering with her pocketbook, you know?
And I know, you know, back when she was doing appearances, I think maybe Fox News and some other news stations, I would get calls from farmers and others here in Jefferson County saying, hey, we got to do something about the Food Babe. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what do you want me to do? Well, the answer is the Farm Babe, and I love it. I love it. It's great.
There you go.
So, so that was sort of your first experience then at attempting to be that voice for agriculture, to advocate for agriculture. But beyond that, what would have been your first experience? And how did you prepare for this? I mean, did you just dive right in and make things up, stay at a Holiday Inn Express? What did you do?
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of work at the Inn Express, all sorts of different styles. Because I, I do have like a background in public speaking and whatnot. In high school, I was in like enrolled in college level speaking courses, and I grew up in pageants, and I was in forensics and a lot of things like that. And I was kind of always on stage my whole life, whether I was singing, dancing, modeling, pageants, whatever, as a high schooler or, whatnot. But so that's kind of always been a part of who I am to my core. So when people started asking me to public speak, it was kind of a natural transition, I guess, or not necessarily a transition, I should say addition, because I don't know. I just started doing these blog posts, and then I got picked up. I'm a columnist for Ag Daily. I've been writing with them now for over 4 years, and I attend a lot of conferences. And I think I found some people in the beginning that really inspired me. Like, I think Rob Syke was probably one of my biggest inspirations when I was sharing his TED Talks about the future of agriculture. I got really interested in the sciences, and it just kind of went from there. Like it just started off. I think I was able to connect to a lot of people because I didn't grow up on a farm, born and raised, like I was around it growing up, but some people that are farmers, like born and raised, have never left the farm, they could be disconnected from the disconnect. And so the fact that I knew what it felt like to be on the other end, where I knew what it felt like to fear her food and be misled, it was kind of just like this natural passion within me to be like, oh my God, I understand. Like, let me help you. Like, I promise you your food is healthy and safe and fantastic. And like, let's just chat, because I could really empathize with people in those shoes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the questions that was popping to mind here, one of the things I experience is all too often we preach to the choir.
Yeah.
And, we have a tendency to, when we're going to do outreach, where do we outreach? To the agricultural community. What's been your experience, and how do we move past that? Because that is so critical for us to do in agriculture.
It is, yeah, for sure. And I think it's really important to include people outside of agriculture. Like, working with influencers is such a popular way now to share the story. And so I get invited on a lot of tours, whether they're ag manufacturers or farm tours or whatever. And I partner with different brands to be an influencer. And that's great. But when I get asked to speak at conferences or be asked on podcasts outside of agriculture, it's just the best, because during Q&A, it's like every hand goes up. Like, people are really eager to learn about where their food comes from, and they think it's cool. They just don't always get the opportunity. So I do think it's up to us, like when I do these farm tours or whatnot, it's great. But I'm like, hey, I have some great people in mind that are outside of agriculture that have a huge following that would love this, and their following's probably even bigger than mine, and they're not in the ag background. So working with celebrities, influencers, people that can help magnify our voice. Like right now, we've got like the Natalie Portmans of the world that are convincing people that vegan's the way to go, and that, farmers aren't even allowed to talk about what happens on their farms. And I'm like, none of this is true, right? And so it's important that celebrities have such a big voice, but it's important that agriculture is working with them, because they can help us get the truth out. We just have to share that in a fun and interesting way and involve the right people. They want to know. And yeah, it is really important to branch outside of the choir.
Now, what do you mean by, for those that may not know, what do you mean by influencer?
An influencer is really an extension of advertising nowadays, right? So instead of doing maybe like billboards or yellow page ads or advertisements in that way, you work with influencers or brand ambassadors. I would be considered an influencer. We have a social media following, and then you can partner up with people like myself, other influencers, to help spread that message. So, like, for example, I worked with the Idaho Potato Commission, right? And I was out, they had me out in Idaho. They showed me like how potatoes are grown, harvested, sprayed, like not manufactured, like packaged, all that stuff. And so that was really cool because I was able to take that and do blog posts and do videos and posts and share stories and pictures. And so I'm kind of that voice to take what they do and then use social media as a tool to share that information, right?
Yeah. No, that's, I'm sorry, I missed that last part, Michelle.
That's just one example.
Yeah, no, that is interesting, and you know, it is the new way of marketing. So we might have to talk to you about bringing agricultural food processors to Jefferson County and how you might help us make that happen. So your services are free, right?
not like no. But you know, it is how I make my living, right? You know, so there's people, you know, like professors or something. You know, it's like different people make speaking honorariums and sometimes they don't, but you know, this is how I make my living is through speaking and an influencer. This is what I do as the bread and butter, you know, so it's not my side hustle anymore.
Well, I just want to take a moment to remind our viewers, if you would like to submit a question, just go to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You just click on that. There's something will pop up where you can type in your question, you hit submit, that pops up on my screen, and then I will incorporate that question into our conversation with Michelle. So please don't be shy about submitting your questions, and I will do the best I can to get those incorporated. Michelle, one of the things I've run into is you might be talking about one particular aspect of agriculture and somebody on the other side says, hey, you don't represent me. How do you deal with that? What's your response to that? And the reason I'm asking this question, especially for our audience, is to help all of us watching today learn how to do what you're doing, even if it's just in our neighborhood scale. I want all of us to learn some of the things that you do and how to deal with these situations you might find.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, as humans, it's like we're always wired to take the negativity so personally, right? Like you can have a million people tell you you're amazing, and you can have one person that's like, I think you're ugly. And you're like, oh, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you're never going to please you're never going to please everybody. Like it doesn't matter who you are, what you do. It's like in the rare, and I would say that like the detractors are a very, very, very small part of it. And so for the people that are thinking about starting, I would say go for it. And you can never let like negativity get you down, because a majority of it is really wonderful, beneficial. It's positive. You know, over 90% of people are in the movable middle. And so, yeah, I mean, it's important to just stay true to yourself and the facts. And even if you have, I always say, hey, at least I'm not a politician or like a Kardashian or something, right? Where like, where everybody hates you just to hate you. So yeah. I think that's such a small part of it. And we have to just focus on the positive and keep moving forward with doing the right thing.
Okay. But it's important to be prepared at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would ask you to elaborate on that, like prepared.
I mean, as far as the background information that you're talking about, whatever the topic is,
Yeah. Sense. Yeah. Like have the knowledge there. And, you know, the other thing too, is if like I get asked questions all the time, I'm not an expert on everything. Right. But the beauty of, here's another great example of being an influencer. The beauty about being an influencer is that you're kind of like a neutral voice where I don't have all the answers, but I do have a plethora of experts at my fingertips that I can get the answers. And so it's not always about like, you know, like you might talk to a dairy farmer, for example, you know, they do that all day, every day. It's what they know. It's all they know. They are just dairy, dairy, dairy. Whereas I'm like, I want to learn about dairy. I want to learn about beef. I want to learn about, you know, corn and lettuce and apples and everything, right? And so from there, when you travel and you work as an influencer or as a public speaker, you're going to conferences, you're meeting so many people. Like my Rolodex is amazing, right? Where you're just like connecting with these people, and it's like, wow, like I might text you sometime if I have a question. And it happens all the time. It's just about building that network where you can say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you with the answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know. Like that's another thing that's annoying about social media, right? When you get these keyboard warriors that they're like, well, I watched Food Inc. and therefore I know so much about farming. And the farmers are sitting here going like, no, that's not how this works. And that's not a truthful film. So just because somebody watches a movie on Netflix doesn't make them an expert, you know? So we always have to be humble enough to say, I don't know all the answers, but let's find them. Like, let's work together and let's use our critical thinking abilities to connect with the experts to get the real facts, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's see, I've got,
Are some questions?
Yeah, we've got a question coming in. Are you seeing any difference in how people removed from agriculture are viewing where food comes from in COVID 2020? Are there opportunities for agriculture going forward from this?
Yeah, I guess I would want to elaborate or ask more questions on to verify, like the COVID's impact on the food supply, meaning like meat shortages, or, I mean, I guess I would be curious to know, like, I mean, I guess I'll answer this question how I feel how I'd interpret it is COVID has given us all an experience where we have, you know, had the toilet paper shortage, the meat shortage, you know, all these different things where, I mean, we were, as a country, we're wasting, you know, billions of dollars in food that just had to be buried, right? So it was terrible. It was awful to just see all these farmers' hard work and not have a place for it, right? And I think people don't realize how intricate, you know, food manufacturing is. When we have hotels and cruise ships and conferences and all these industries shut down, you know, music venues, when all these things shut down, I mean, these food, you know, these food plants are made to build like 50-pound blocks of cheese. You can't just take that and say, oh, we're going to sell that in a grocery store now. Like, you can't just take all these little individual butters used in the conference industry and say, we're going to take them to a grocery store now. Like, that's not how it works. And so it was really sad to see farmers, you know, dump milk or lose their harvest. And so, you know, I don't know, what do? You hope there's never another pandemic, right? But, you know, at the same time, I know, Jay, you and I talked about this yesterday, actually, where you were talking about how you're trying to get another meat processor in upstate New York, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, we need farmers, we need butchers, we need meat processors, and maybe a little less regulation so that more farmers can sell direct.
Yeah.
And I normally do farmers markets when I was living in Iowa. I just moved to Florida like last month. But when I was in Iowa, I was doing farmers markets all summer. And this year I wasn't able to do that with COVID because I had no place to take my livestock, because people were like, there's a meat shortage, and they all freaked out and started buying direct from farmers, which was great for the farmers, but it put people like me out of business, because it's like, oh, I can't get an appointment with the butcher until March of 2021. And, you know, the USDA inspector is only there one day a week, right? And so you're limited with selling USDA inspected meat at farmers markets. So the whole thing is just really frustrating. But I guess the other part of that question is new opportunities, right? Like, did it raise awareness on us to say, hey, maybe we could do this better? And so hopefully that's what we're looking at. Maybe you want to elaborate on that too, Jay, with what you were saying with your, with the meat processor that you're trying to get, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we saw is people, because of the pandemic, because of all the shutdowns, people recognized, I want local food versus, you know, what's not available on the store shelves now. So we had this big rush on, you know, buying, you know, meat from farmers, buying produce from farmers, and so on. Then we had the problem of we don't have enough USDA processors here in Northern New York. And we've been working on this for years, trying to attract somebody in to do this. And so that is an ongoing thing. It creates that opportunity. You know, it brought it to everybody's awareness now. In fact, they're talking about it at the state legislature level now, that there is a problem in New York State with meat processing infrastructure. So it's an opportunity. It was a challenge, but it's also raised the awareness of that opportunity. And that's the question, I think, was reflecting on that. You know, did people come home to get local food versus just worrying about it on the store shelves?
Yeah, I think the buying local thing was cool. It was cool to see more people interested and understanding, like, oh my gosh, you know, like to all of a sudden have a meat shortage, you know, you're like, wow, this has never happened to me before. Wow. All of a sudden, are we starting to think, where does it come from? Gosh, maybe I should be thankful for farmers, you know, like farmers, in my opinion, are just like one of the most underappreciated careers, right? You know, even when you see like the frontline workers for COVID, it's like, of course we love and thank our doctors and nurses and everybody on the health front lines, but I feel like farmers are never included in it. It's like, but without farmers, you know, where would we be? You know, it's like, it's everything. It's the clothes on our back, it's the food and drinks and everything. And, you know, it's like we're frontline, like truckers and people that feed you so that we be healthy, you know?
Yeah. We've had a couple more questions come in. I'm going to go right to the question part of this first one. What are some thoughts you have on how you approach the aspect of advocacy where we see, you know, one type of agriculture pitted against another one, organic versus conventional, you know, vegetarian versus, you know, meat eaters and so on.
Yeah.
How do you approach that aspect when you're dealing with advocacy?
For sure. Yeah, and it is so sad when you see people pitting against one another. And at the end of the day, like we have to remain kind, right? And a lot of this, like, for example, you know, I'm pretty outspoken about biotech, right? Like I came from a farm in Iowa where we were growing GMOs. And that was something that I was really passionate about talking about, was like the benefits of GMOs, right? But just because we had a large scale conventional farm doesn't mean that we were doing things wrong, right? Like you know, we had earned awards for like Farmers of the Year for soil and water conservation, doing a lot of regenerative type practices, right? Like, but you have like organic food companies or like the non-GMO project spreading all this misinformation. It's like people that are against GMOs, it's like, well, where are they getting this information from? They're getting it from the food corporations who set to profit off of non-GMO, like the non-GMO project. Mind you, there's only 10 commercially available GMO crops in the US, right? So a vast majority of foods are non-GMO naturally to begin with, because GMOs are just a very small part of what you can grow. And so I hate that, because we should be honest and kind. And just because somebody does or does not have a special label doesn't necessarily mean that it is or is not more superior. You know, like sometimes organic farms don't use pesticides and sometimes they do. Sometimes non-organic farms use pesticides and sometimes they don't. So a lot of this is just food labeling. And so it's important for people to get the facts and understand marketing versus that. And it is really important to celebrate all types of farms, right? Because whether you're big, small, organic or not, whoever you are, there's a place for you. There's a niche for you. We need small scale farmers in our community that maybe have a couple acres. They're amazing. But we also need the guys that have thousands of acres that are feeding the world on a global export scale, right? So everything has its advantages or disadvantages, or there's a lot of gray areas though, where too many people just want to paint it this way or that way. And it's like, hold on, there's so much more that goes into it. So I think it's important when advocating to explain the facts, but I mean, I'm not afraid to call out bullshit. You know, it's part of my language, but I don't mind it, you know, and you have to, because it's not right. It's like, just because I don't carry a fancy label doesn't mean that I'm a bad farmer, and probably quite the opposite, you know? And so it's frustrating, but we just got to use kindness, stick to the facts, and just stick with who you are. You know, there's so many different ways you can advocate, whether you are doing like a YouTube channel or just a Twitter account or whatever it is, podcast. There's so many ways you can do that. As long as you stay true to who you are and you're having fun with it and you're staying true to yourself, then that's awesome, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I'll follow up just real quickly. You know, I was speaking to a group at a college one time, a class at a college, and I was starting to wrap up my presentation, and a woman in the very front row was actually in tears when she said this to me. She said, non-traditional student, a mom, and she was in tears. She said to me, "I don't give my children dairy products." And I'm like, well, why? And she said, "I can't afford organic, and I've been told that non-organic milk is dangerous."
Right.
And that floored me to have that happen. And I said to her, look, I have, I forget how old my son was at the time. I said, I have a child at home and I give him conventional whole milk.
Right.
And that son today is 19 and he's 6'5" and 270 pounds. Well, you talked to Nate. He's very healthy. And
yeah.
That's my concern, is that when we pit one against the other, mostly for marketing purposes, we're hurting all of us, and we're hurting the consumer especially.
Absolutely. That's very well. Yeah, that's a perfect way to summarize it. Like it hurts all of us. And that's the other thing too about marketing labels too, is it's like, people have over time realized, oh, natural doesn't mean anything. And now it's like, what label are they going to come out with next, right? Like, we're labeling the consumer to death. It's organic, natural, non-GMO, gluten-free, free range, antibiotic-free, hormone-free. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, what's next? Can we just come up with something a little more original? Can we get like a Geico commercial type mentality towards food? You know what I mean? Like, you can sell a product without throwing other agricultural methods under the bus. You can sell a product or create a good marketing around the fun, interesting, funny, heartfelt, whatever you want to do. There's so many ways to sell a product. Why are we using demeaning, misleading marketing language? And don't get me wrong, right? The people that choose to do that on their product at the farmer's market, it's like, I get it, but I also see, like, when I would do farmers markets, I wouldn't have any of those labels on, but I'd still sell just as much, if not more, so are people actually looking for those labels, or do we just think they are, and I'm sure a lot of that's regional too. If you're in Los Angeles compared to Iowa, it's going to mean something different, you know what I mean? Because it's just more urban. So it's
Yeah, I want to move on from that topic, but first, just to reiterate, I think, and you would agree with this, it's great that agriculture has the opportunity to sell any of those products, whether it's organic, natural, conventional, whatever. It's good that we offer variety to the consumer to fit their lifestyle choices.
Yep.
I think that's important.
That, absolutely.
Okay, a little bit
profitable by all means.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit different question coming in here. Do you think that states could authorize a parallel system to FDA to allow farmers to sell into the public market, just not interstate? What would this involve for the farmer?
Oh gosh. Something like that sounds like it would be great. But oh gosh, is there so much that goes into that, right? I mean, right now, I think, and this is all, I mean, it varies state by state, region by region. Some places have stricter regulations than others. But yeah, I mean, if we could have less government intervention, I mean, this is just my opinion, right? Like, I don't really like to dive into these topics much because people get a little too political. I'm not political. I try to just stay away from those topics. But yeah, I mean, if more farmers could sell direct, I mean, that would be great. If we could get deregulation or have more different types of oversight, like FDA in the state where, like I said, I had one USDA inspector that was in Iowa 1 day a week. So you're really limited with what you can do. That would be great. If somebody wants to start it and show me how, by all means, please do, because I know I wouldn't know how to go about it. Yeah. But that is a really great question and great point. And it would be wonderful if we could have, I understand the food safety and food regulations behind it, but to your point too, Jay, you mentioned earlier, I've been to 67 countries, and America has the safest, arguably maybe one of the strictest food supplies in the world. If you're in Southeast Asia or Guatemala or something, you just walk down the street and people are just selling stuff in the road, and the food safety standards, really, there isn't nearly as much oversight, and they seem to do just fine with it, right? Right. So it all just depends. It's just so hard to say. Yeah. We're just different. And could we regulate it? In my opinion, we should, but I'm also not like that expert, you know what I mean?
With the challenges that we're encountering in the meat industry and the meat supply right now, I know there's conversations, I don't know how high in a level they've risen yet, but there's conversations going on about possibly creating a better state inspection system to maybe not replace, but to augment the USDA inspection system for meat processing, just so that it's a little bit easier for state certified meat processing to be started.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the people who do site inspection, like where maybe their own meat processing or whatnot, from what I understand, it takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of money, and it's a lot of headaches from what I've heard from people that have done it. Again, this varies by state by state. I've had some people be like, "Oh, it wasn't that hard," but it's just it's so patchwork, right? Like I don't think, again, you can never paint it with one broad brush, but yeah, I mean, I think if more people can sell direct, nothing wrong with that. As long as it's done safely and affordably and legally, then let's look into it, you know?
Michelle, I really want to change course here. We have a question that's waiting for us, but I think that question will be better answered after we get to this next topic. You had a really great effort that just happened, this past year, past 2 years, something like that, working with one of the biggest fast food restaurant chains in the world. And you were able to get them to change their message. Can you tell us that story? I think that's really important for our viewers to hear.
Yeah, so Burger King did an ad in July of this year, and it was called Cow's Menu. And they were trying to highlight their sustainability initiatives, but they did this ad that was extremely offensive to cattle farmers. If anybody wants to look for it, just do a hashtag, search the hashtag Cow's Menu on like Twitter or YouTube. Although it'll raise your blood pressure. it was a very, very offensive ad. And so Burger King received a ton of backlash on it, and I ended up doing some posts and writing some posts on it that were starting to go viral, and I ended up sending a tweet to their chief marketing officer, just explaining how, as farmers, you know, I was on a cattle farm at the time in Iowa, and I said, you know, this is really offensive to us as cattle farmers. Like, we're not a bunch of environmentally destructive rednecks, you know what I mean? Like, we're a very science-based group, and we don't like to be portrayed this way. And so anyway, Burger King reached out to me, and I had a Zoom call with their chief marketing officer, Fernando. And I said, hey, like, if you want to learn about what we do and sustainability, like, come on out, like, I'll show you. And I'll be darned, he actually took me up on it. It was
oh boy.
incredible. It was amazing, because there's so many times that food companies just ignore us or maybe ban or silence us. And the fact that Burger King took the time to come out, and then we had the executive that did the ad, he came out, and they had a camera crew, and I had a bunch of experts. I involved the Iowa Farm Bureau and Iowa State and just a few other people to really show them. Like, I took them to a large scale cattle feedlot where they could see maybe where like Burger King's beef might be sourced at a place like this, right? Like, I think they have like 7,000 head of cattle. Took them to a large scale dairy farm that had methane digesters, because a lot of their things were just like methane. We need to reduce methane by feeding lemongrass to cattle. And we're like, well, I don't know enough about lemongrass and cattle, but where are we going to source this lemongrass? How much is it?
It's a lot of lemongrass.
Yeah, it's a lot of lemongrass. And so we're like, I don't know. We have methane digesters and cattle diets that are already formulated for this, and we're already turning to science to maximize our rate of gain and reduce resources. Farmers have been doing more with less for decades, you know, as far as improving production and conserving resources. So anyway, getting off on a tangent sometimes, but yeah, so I took them to this dairy farm and showed them a methane digester. And it's like, here you go. Like, this is thousands of cows manure in this pit, and you trap the methane and turn that into renewable natural gas, renewable energy, fuel. And that was with this company called Brightmark. Brightmark has a project in Matteson, Wisconsin. So it was right on their way to come over and visit us. So I was like, hey, I'll meet you over there. I'll show you around the farm, and then they came out to our farm. I got Fernando out there feeding the cattle. I put him to work.
Great.
Fun, and then they did a new ad. So, and I was in it, and it was nice to have a camera crew, but yeah, Burger King since posted it on their social media here recently. I think just last month or 2 months ago, they posted the new ad, and I'm just thankful. And Fernando and I are doing a panel now at the Farm Bureau convention next month and working closer together. And I love the fact, this is what we have to do, right? We preach to the choir, but we have to remember, we have to talk to marketers, food marketers, and these big corporations that might be more willing to listen than we think. We just have to try, Yeah. And so I commend them. I hope that it's a lesson for other food companies to listen to us and not fight us, but celebrate us as industry, us meaning like the agriculture industry, farmers,
That story is inspirational for all of us in that it was a tweet that you sent that started that.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to the next question from our audience is, how can we be better influencers to our friends, our neighbors, to Burger King? How do we do that?
I think you have to remember to have empathy. I think as the number one thing is to put yourself in their shoes. Like if somebody asks a question or has a concern, so oftentimes people put up their defenses right away and they're like, whoa, and it's easy to get offended, but you have to just be like, I completely understand. I've heard those myths all, time and time again. Oh my gosh, I know it's crazy. As a farmer, it drives me crazy, but I'm just curious, where did you hear this? A lot of that information is like, where did you hear this from? And a lot of times they don't really know, or it was like, oh, I saw it on Netflix, or, like something like that. So put yourself in their shoes and realize that a majority of people are not extremists. Over 90% of people are in the movable middle that just want to learn more. And you have to remember that. There's some people that no matter what you say, the sky is blue, they will be like, it's red or whatever, where facts don't matter. But you have to build that trust, right? And it all depends on trust. And the good news is that when they're already in your friend circle, you kind of already have a built-in trust. Right. So it's like, even I went to Chicago this summer where I used to live and visiting friends, and I just had a friend of mine say, oh, you guys got to meet Michelle. She advocates for farmers. She's, she writes and speaks on all this, and oh my gosh, she can answer all your questions about food labels. And I just looked around, and it's like every mom in this room was just like, yeah, question. They want to know, but they don't always know where to turn. And so I just want to encourage people that are thinking about doing it to just do it and stay true to yourself and realize that you really can make a difference, whether you're volunteering at your kid's school or you're having a conversation with the guy that's stocking produce at your local grocer's. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of something to have a breakthrough that really can make a difference.
What's the biggest topic that you get asked questions about? And I will share that for me, it seems like almost always when I go to some lunch meeting or I'm speaking to some group, especially at lunchtime for some reason, I always end up having to talk and answer questions about cow manure. That's the crazy topic that I always get hit with. They want to know more about cow manure and how we handle cow manure. What do you run into?
I don't know who you're hanging out with, Jay. I'm just kidding.
And it's lunchtime. It's usually lunchtime too.
Yeah. Well, I think that ties in perfectly to what I hear is the biggest question or concern, I guess, is like the so-called factory farming.
Yeah.
If you talk to farmers that farm on a large scale, I mean, like the term factory farm is quite offensive. I mean, it makes it sound like it's some blank, faceless, metal-roomed corporation full of people that don't care, when the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. So, farmers' values haven't changed. They're just able to use technology to get bigger. And if they choose to do that, that's fine. 98% of farms are family farms, though. So a lot of times we hear this corporate farm, and it's like, they're still family farms. They might just choose to become incorporated for tax purposes. And just because they're big doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It doesn't mean that their animals are abused. It doesn't mean that the quality is poor. Can you have better quality on a smaller farm? Maybe, sure. Maybe not. You never know. Because again, there's so many gray areas. But I've been on some of these so-called factory farms, and I've been incredibly impressed with the science, with the biosecurity, with the climate, with the lighting, with everything that they do. There's so much science to ensure that everybody gets enough to eat. And it's really something that should be celebrated. But kind of getting off on a tangent here.
We were talking about the topics that you get
Yeah.
asked the most about.
And I think that's really kind of where it all boils down to, is debunking some of these so-called factory farm myths. The vegan animal rights groups have really put out, they've kind of taken that narrative, you know, and gotten celebrities involved and trying to make it sound like animal agriculture is awful, but it's really not. There's a lot of science that goes into proper care for livestock, regardless of size or label.
Okay. So going back to the question about how do we do a better job of doing what you're doing so well at, what would you suggest? What's the first step in becoming a better neighbor, an influencer, somebody with 200,000, followers?
Well, I always try to vary my content, I think is really important, and also have a memorable name that's catchy. I think that's probably one of the biggest people, like I talk to so many farm advocates, but they go maybe as like their name, and maybe their last name is really long and hard to pronounce, or maybe their blog name is something really long where you know this person's a great advocate, but you're like, oh gosh, what was her name again? Or what was the name? What was that, you know? And so I think a lot of it is just if you're going to start a brand or a page, have something that people can remember, you know? So that's a big one. And vary your content. I mean, everybody loves to laugh. And again, with farming and marketing, you know, you kind of have these labels pitting against one another, or you have telling the story of the family farm, which is the jangly guitar and the feel good. I'm the 5th generation farmer. And it's like, yeah, we all know this. Like, we've said this and done this, and it's fine and it's great, but try to do something different. Find your niche. Do some funny videos. I mean, like the Peterson Farm Brothers are a great example. You know what I mean? Like, their videos have reached tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people now because they're humorous. They're funny. They're making farming cool. They're making it funny and interesting. You've got somebody like Derek Josie, like TDF Honest Farming. He does selfie videos with his cows every day, and they're just adorable. Like, you've got Jess Peters from Spruce Row Farms who sings to her cows. So people are finding niches where it's just something different and funny and unique. So stay true to yourself. I mean, as long as you're doing something like sharing humor, memes, personal stories, you don't want it to be all science. You don't want it to be all humor, but kind of vary that content so it's more interesting for your audience, I guess, is kind of some tips I would offer.
Okay. What, some people aren't comfortable with social media. Do they have to be on social media to be an influencer?
Well, to be an influencer, I'd say probably yes, because that's really what being an influencer is being a digital voice for media, right? But there's so many other ways you can get involved. Like, there's so many ag in the classroom groups that are amazing. There's a lot of farmers that volunteer, work out in schools, or that get involved in that way in your community. I always love having conversations with people at the grocery store, like the people that work there. I'm like, hey, what kind of questions are you getting? And just kind of you're helping educate the people that are the face of their food in the grocery store. And we oftentimes overlook them as an important source of information. So get involved with that. You can attend different conferences, farmers markets, and really branch out of agriculture. You know, I go to a lot of like blogger type conferences where I'm the only farm girl in the room, right? You know, but you get to network with all these people that they're foodies, they're food bloggers, we all eat, but then they're like, whoa, you do what? That's so cool, because they don't always get exposed to that. So have fun and think outside the box.
Would you recommend, even on the local neighborhoods type level, would you recommend like newsletters or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. All that. Your local news stations are great, newspaper publications, news, anything like that. I mean, there's so many ways that we can help spread the message. I use social media as the most popular example because it's just let's face it, for one source of information nowadays. So, you know, if you're involved in your community, that's amazing. But you look at something like, you know, I do posts on social media that reach 10, 20 million people with one post, right? So you think about that. What could we do if, as an industry, agriculture had more celebrities, right? Like they just had this big farm tour, you know, I know like there was what John Deere just did a virtual concert with like Maddie and Tay and all these like big celebrities. And it's like, wow, like could we utilize these relationships to better share, you know, fact versus fiction and help us explain a little bit more about what we do? I mean, we all love country music and John Deere and everything, but like, come on, let's do a little more. Like, remember Got Milk in the 90s, how cool it was? Like the milk mustache, every celebrity under the sun. I remember being a kid in the 90s going like, man, milk is cool. Like, I want to look like Tyra Banks when I grow up. You know what I mean? Like a supermodel. I want to be a pro athlete. Like, I need to drink milk, you know, like you just look up to these people. And that's being an influencer, right? But it's just TV. It's a celebrity influencer being versus a social media influencer. So there's so many different avenues of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, to bring that down to the local level, for example, if you own a small farm here in Jefferson County, your ability to influence might be sponsoring that local Little League team and bringing them chocolate milk after the game.
100%. Offering farm tours, agritourism, getting some classrooms out on your farm, getting some elementary school kids to learn where their milk comes from, like little things like that for sure. Community.
I want to get this question in here. You mentioned not being from an ag background and using that to help develop your educational materials. We often hear the term mansplaining. I think many in ag are guilty of farm-splaining. How do we avoid patronizing the general public?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, it is. And again, it goes back to empathy, right? Because I know that like when people are misinformed, like especially myself coming from that misinformed kind of city background, I know what it feels like. People aren't stupid, right? Like I feel like so often of the times people are just get into arguments on social media. Like they're just like, you're just stupid. You don't know any better. And it's like, no. Just because they're not an expert in that right now, just because they didn't grow in it doesn't mean that they're not willing and open to learning. You just have to be nice about it. Like you're never going to win anybody over by being a jerk. So I think when it comes to farming, we have to use analogies and remember that the average person probably doesn't even know what a soybean field looks like. They probably don't even know what a combine is. And that doesn't mean that they're stupid. It's just that they've never been exposed to it. So you just have to remember to be kind and take a step back and be like, so, you know, when we use words like when we harvest our grain instead of like use the combine to pick or whatever. They're kind of like, okay. And I use a lot of analogies, you know, like when you talk about, well, we spray pesticides sometimes, right? Like you say that and it can sound so abrasive, but it's like, well, the reason why we do that is because plants are living just like you and I are living. So an analogy I use a lot is we need chemicals to survive, right? We need sunscreen, we need bug spray, medicine, nutrients, food. We need all these things. Plants need that too. So that's another reason why in the industry we call them crop protection products, because at the end of the day, if we didn't have the ability to protect our crops, they'd all die. And then we die because we don't have enough to eat, you know? And so it's important to just utilize terms and analogies and just kind of think about it in a way that you would want to be explained to. And yeah, talk to other people like you want to be talked to. Explain that in a way that is just empathetic and kind, like you're talking to a good friend, you know?
Michelle, we have, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Was there anything that I went fast and we had a ton of questions come in. Did we miss anything that you want to get out?
I don't really. So I really appreciated this conversation today and the questions. If anybody wants to message me after this too, you can find me all over social media. I'm happy to try. But yeah, you know, I think that's just the main goal that I like to discuss and share with people is just to encourage everybody to get involved, no matter how that is. And just remember that something as simple as a tweet can influence a global brand. Remember, like the Super Bowl was another good example too. Remember when they ripped on corn syrup, and then Anheuser-Busch got a lot of backlash, but then they fixed their tune and started thanking and celebrating the corn farmers, right? So just remember that we can make a difference, and just be proactive and just have fun. And it gets easier the more you go. The more you practice it, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more confident you are. But just start. I love advocating. It's great, and I hope other people do as well. And hopefully this helped some people today.
Well, it helped me, that's for certain. And I sincerely appreciate your time and the willingness you've had to share all of this with us. I want to remind the audience that this is recorded, so you will be able to go back and watch this again. Go to agricultureevents.com. It will be on there. Also want to remind the audience that on January 28th, we kick off the new year talking with David Haight, National Vice President of Programs for American Farmland Trust. We'll be talking with David about his thoughts on what we might expect to see out of the Biden administration in regards to agricultural policy. So obviously that's going to be a very critical issue to be talking about. So please don't forget to join us on January 28th. Michelle, thank you again. This has been fantastic.
Welcome, and thank you well.
Thank you. And to our audience, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Bye.